Our story today seems like it's been ripped straight from a psychological thriller, but I assure you, it's all real. This is about a PhD student in criminology who dedicated himself to studying the minds of criminals and eventually became the very thing he's studying. Let's meet Bryan Kohberger. He's a 28-year-old criminology student who sent shockwaves across America when he was arrested for one of the most brutal crimes of 2022. I mean, this wasn't just another murder case. This is about the thin line between studying evil and becoming a part of it. The University of Idaho murders captivated the nation. They found 4 college students that were brutally slain in their off-campus home, while 2 of their roommates survived, both of them completely unaware of the horrors that had just unfolded a few feet away from them. And for almost 7 weeks, the small college town lived in fear as the case went unsolved. Then came the twist that nobody saw coming. The alleged perpetrator wasn't some drifter or unknown criminal. It was a PhD student in criminology at a neighboring university, just across the state line. And as the details emerged, the case just got more and more disturbing. They discovered a guy who spent his days analyzing and studying criminal behavior. This guy wrote academic papers about crime and then would discuss the mindset of criminals with his professors. And according to his classmates, Bryan showed an unusual fascination with the psychology of criminals. This would later be the same guy who allegedly crept into a student home in the middle of the night and changed 4 young lives forever. So how does someone go from studying criminals to allegedly becoming one? What is it that drives a person with insider knowledge of law enforcement techniques to allegedly commit such a methodical crime? And what clues did Kohberger leave behind that ultimately led investigators right to his family's home in Pennsylvania? This, my friends, is the chilling story of Bryan Kohberger. It's a case that's going to force us to confront some uncomfortable questions about the darker corners of human psychology. Warning: the following is meant for educational purposes only and should not be taken otherwise. Apex Crime Lords does not condone, encourage, or glorify the actions of the individuals covered in this program. Due to the disturbing nature of this case, viewer discretion is strongly advised. Bryan Christopher Kohberger was born on November 21st, 1994, and grew up in eastern Pennsylvania. And by all accounts, his childhood seemed to be pretty ordinary. He was raised in a working-class family in the small town of Effort, which is near the Pocono Mountains. His dad was a maintenance worker, and his mom worked as a school counselor. Bryan had 2 older sisters who, by anyone's standards, were well-adjusted and successful in their own lives. His former high school classmates from Pleasant Valley remember Bryan as being quiet and somewhat socially awkward. He seemed just to be a teenager who often just kept to himself. So he wasn't the popular kid, but he wasn't completely isolated either. However, underneath this seemingly average exterior, Kohberger was dealing with his own demons. According to some classmates, he had been overweight as a younger teenager, and he was picked on because of it. Later, he would go through a dramatic physical transformation. He lost a ton of weight and became almost unrecognizably thin. And with this physical change, some described a shift in his demeanor as well. After high school, Kohberger's path took him first to a community college, then to DeSales University in Pennsylvania. It was there he earned both his bachelor's and master's degree in psychology and criminal justice. So this is where his academic interest in criminal behavior began to take shape. His former professor at DeSales remembered him as an intelligent student who seemed to have a keen interest in understanding criminal psychology. During his time at DeSales, Kohberger conducted a research project that would later come under intense scrutiny. He created a survey asking ex-convicts about their thoughts and feelings before and during their crimes. The questions went into detail about their decision-making processes, their emotional states, and what they did to prepare for their criminal acts. And when you look back on it, this research takes on a whole new disturbing dimension. Was this academic curiosity or something more sinister? In 2022, Kohberger's academic journey took him across the country to Washington State University in Pullman, where he enrolled in the PhD program in criminology. It was just a short drive away from the University of Idaho in Moscow. WSU would place Kohberger in geographical proximity to what would become the scene of the crime. And during his time at Washington State, Kohberger continued to stand out for his intense interest in criminal psychology. Classmates said he was someone who was eager to insert himself into discussions about crime scenes and criminal behavior. According to some of his fellow students, he sometimes made them feel uncomfortable with his detailed knowledge and theories about criminals' thought processes. One student said that Kohberger would sometimes press others for their opinions about crimes in ways that felt either awkward or really inappropriate. But I mean, even with these quirks, no one really saw any red flags that would suggest what was allegedly going to happen. I mean, Kohberger was functioning as a teaching assistant at WSU. This guy was helping grade papers and lead discussions in undergraduate criminal justice courses. So this was a guy who, by day, was helping to educate the next generation of law enforcement professionals. But now what makes this case really disturbing is just that Kohberger wasn't just studying any aspect of criminology. He was specifically interested in criminal thinking and decision-making. His scholarly focus seemed to be on how and why criminals choose their targets, and how they plan their actions, and what goes through their minds during the process of a crime. In a twist that now seems, darkly ironic, he was even taking a class that focused on the forensic techniques used to solve crimes. Those that knew him academically said he was very intelligent and had a particular gift for understanding complex criminological theories. So in a lot of ways, Bryan Kohberger represented the future of the field, a promising young man with the potential to contribute meaningful research to our understanding of criminal behavior. In the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022, something terrible happened at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho. 4 University of Idaho students were found deceased in their off-campus rental home. The crime scene was described by law enforcement as one of the most gruesome they had ever encountered. All 4 victims had been attacked with a large, fixed-blade knife while they slept or while they were trying to escape. Some of them had defensive wounds, which means they were trying to fight back against their attacker. And somehow the 2 other roommates, who were in the house at the time, escaped with their lives and unharmed. One of them later told investigators that she had seen a figure dressed in black clothing and a mask walking past her bedroom early in the morning. She had become frozen with fear, and she thought it might be her roommate's friend, so she locked herself in her room. It wasn't until the next morning that the bodies were discovered and the police were called. The brutality of the crime sent shockwaves through the small college town of Moscow, Idaho. This is a place where folks don't even lock their doors at night. Afterwards, students fled campus, classes were canceled, and a community that had really not seen much violence suddenly found itself at the center of a national news story. For almost 7 weeks, police gave out very few details to the public, which of course led to a lot of speculation and fear. The lack of information helped to fuel rumors and conspiracy theories that, of course, spread like wildfire on social media. But behind the scenes, investigators were methodically building their case. The investigation into the quadruple homicide would ultimately involve the local police, the Idaho State Police, and even the FBI. Since they didn't have an obvious suspect, detectives turned to forensic evidence, plus cell phone data, and surveillance footage from around the small town of Moscow. One critical piece of evidence emerged early in the investigation. It was from surveillance cameras from around the city that captured footage of a white Hyundai Elantra that had been driving near the victims' homes around the time of the murders. The vehicle had appeared, disappeared, and then reappeared in such a pattern that it suggested to investigators that someone was circling the area before and after the crime. Their big breakthrough came from DNA evidence that was recovered at the scene. Investigators found a leather knife sheath that had been left behind on one of the victims' beds. From this sheath, forensic technicians were able to isolate a single source of male DNA. This DNA would later be compared to trash recovered from outside Kohberger's family home in Pennsylvania, which prosecutors said was a strong genetic match. Then the cell phone records also played a pretty crucial role. Investigators tracked Kohberger's phone movements in the months leading up to the murders. They found a pattern that suggested that he had been in the area of the victim's home at least a dozen times before the incident. On the night of the murders, his phone was turned off, which of course was a technique often discussed in criminology classes to avoid being tracked. The phone had been reactivated later that morning on his drive back to Pullman. As they found more and more evidence, investigators began to zero in on Bryan Kohberger. The white Hyundai Elantra was registered to him, plus his physical description matched what the surviving roommate had seen. And the piece that was most damning of all was the digital footprint he had left behind that placed him repeatedly in the vicinity of the crime scene. On December 30th, 2022, almost 7 weeks after the murders, Bryan Kohberger was arrested at his parents' home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. He had driven cross-country with his father from Washington State for the winter break, all while seemingly unaware that he was the focus of a nationwide manhunt. News of the arrest shocked those that knew him. Classmates, professors, and former friends all expressed their disbelief that the quiet, smart kid could be linked to such a violent crime. After his arrest, more details began to paint a pretty disturbing picture. A former friend told how Kohberger had struggled with heroin addiction in the past, but he had apparently overcome it. Others noticed his intense interest in police procedures and his habit of analyzing crime scenes in detailed, almost obsessive ways. But maybe the most chilling thing was the revelation that Kohberger had allegedly applied for an internship with the local police department in Pullman, Washington, just a few months before the murders. He had wanted to get hands-on experience in law enforcement investigation techniques. The details of the investigation, which were outlined in the court documents, showed the methodical nature of both the alleged crime and the investigation that followed. Investigators believe that Kohberger might have been stalking the victims and learning their routines, as well as the layout of the home before the attack. They theorize that his academic knowledge of criminal investigations may have influenced his attempt to avoid detection. After his arrest in Pennsylvania, Kohberger was extradited back to Idaho, where he was formally charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. During his first court appearance, he remained expressionless as the charges against him were read. At first, his attorney said that Kohberger was eager to be exonerated, which pretty much suggests that he would fight the charges. However, legal experts noted the substantial evidence laid out in the probable cause affidavit. The case against Kohberger included DNA evidence, the cell phone tracking data that placed him near the scene multiple times, plus you got surveillance footage of his car and eyewitness testimony from the surviving roommate. In June 2023, a grand jury in Latah County, Idaho, indicted Kohberger on the same charges. This would move the case forward without a preliminary hearing that would have made the evidence public. The strategic move by prosecutors allowed them to keep a lot of their evidence under wraps until the trial. When asked to enter a plea during his arraignment, Kohberger stood silent, prompting the judge to enter a not guilty plea on his behalf. His defense team started working on what would likely be a lengthy and complex legal battle. After a change of venue was granted in September of 2024, the judge scheduled Kohberger's trial to begin on August 11, 2025 in Boise, Idaho, where he'll face the death penalty if convicted. The story of Bryan Kohberger represents a disturbing paradox that has fascinated and horrified the public in equal measure. How could someone who dedicated their academic career to understanding criminal behavior allegedly become a perpetrator himself? Some experts in criminal psychology have suggested that Kohberger's interest might not have been all that academic. They point to cases where individuals with similar fascinations have crossed the line from studying crime to becoming a part of it. For some, the detailed study of criminal behavior might be driven by an effort to understand their own dark impulses. And then others have wondered if his research provided him with a sense of power or control that he found addictive. By understanding how criminals think and investigations work, maybe he believed he could commit the perfect crime. In the months after his arrest, armchair psychologists and professional experts alike have speculated about a possible diagnosis. Everything from antisocial personality disorder to schizophrenia to a complex combination of mental health issues. But the truth is, without a comprehensive psychological evaluation, all of that chatter is nothing but speculation. What we do know is that his academic work focused a lot on the decision-making processes of criminals. Kohberger was very interested in the mental processes that would have been at work if he indeed planned and carried out these murders. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the case is the suggestion that his knowledge of criminology and forensics might have influenced his alleged crime. I mean, did he really think he could outsmart investigators by using his insider knowledge? If so, it would be the ultimate irony that the very field he studied would provide the tools for his capture. The Idaho student murders and Kohberger's arrest sent ripples far beyond the small college towns of Moscow and Pullman. For the families of the victims, nothing will ever ease the pain of their loss. These were young people with promising futures who were loved by their families and friends, and their lives were tragically cut short. The surviving roommates had to cope with not only the trauma of what happened in their home, but also with questions about why they were spared. The University of Idaho community was deeply shaken by the events. Students who once felt safe in their small-town environment were now looking over their shoulders. They installed security systems and questioned whether they wanted to return to campus at all. The case also had a profound impact on the field of criminology itself. Universities that teach criminal justice had to contend with the uncomfortable reality that one of their own stood accused of a horrific act of violence. Some criminology programs have since reevaluated how they screen students and what warning signs they might look for. They've had to ask difficult questions about whether the detailed study of criminal behavior could, in rare cases, inspire violence rather than deter it. For law enforcement, the case demonstrated both the challenges and power of modern investigative techniques, despite the complex nature of the crime scene and the lack of immediate suspects. The combination of DNA evidence, digital forensics, and traditional police work eventually led them to their suspect. The story of Bryan Kohberger forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about human nature. It reminds us that sometimes the line between studying darkness and becoming a part of it can be thin in a very scary way. As this case makes its way through the legal system, we've got a lot of questions that remain unanswered. What was the motive for these killings? Did Kohberger know any of the victims personally, or were they selected for reasons only he understands? The fact that Kohberger studied criminology doesn't make him guilty. It will be the evidence, not the irony, that will determine his fate in court. But regardless of the legal outcome, this case will likely be studied for years to come by the very field that Kohberger once helped to join. It'll become a case study in criminal psychology classes. Criminology students will learn about a cautionary tale about the dark paths that fascination with crimes can sometimes take. For the families, no verdict can bring back their loved ones. Their lives were cut short in an act of senseless violence that defies explanation or understanding. Next time on Apex Crime Lords, we're going to take a look into the shadowy empire of Yulan Adonai Archaga Carrillas, better known as El Porky, the notorious leader of MS-13 in Honduras, who landed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. How did this dangerous gang leader build a criminal network that stretched from Central America to the United States? And what brutal tactics earned him a $100,000 bounty on his head? How did his strategic leadership transform a street gang into a transnational criminal organization? Join us for this chilling exploration of one of the most feared figures in modern organized crime. The Kohberger case raises some fascinating questions about the relationship between studying criminal behavior and potentially becoming a part of it. What do you think draws people to study criminology in the first place? If Kohberger is found guilty, what do you think this tells us about how academic institutions screen students who want to study criminal justice? Do you think we should have psychological evaluations for people entering these fields? What psychological factors might drive someone to not only study criminal behavior, but to potentially engage in it? And how should universities handle situations where students show an unusual or concerning level of interest in violent crime? I mean, where is the line between academic curiosity and disturbing behavior that should raise some red flags? And what aspects of this case do you find most disturbing or compelling? As we look back on this tragedy, perhaps the most important thing we can do is remember them not so much as victims in a high-profile case, but as young people who brought joy to their families and friends, who had dreams and ambitions, and whose memories deserve to be honored. So how will Bryan Kohberger be remembered? That's up for you to decide. Please leave your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you enjoy these shows, please subscribe and give us a share. really helps us out. Until next time, stay safe and stay dangerous.